So the next question is a linear programming question. So in these type of questions, when we want to optimize something, it's very important. The first thing is always to read through the question very carefully and to understand decision variables, objective function, and constraints of the problem, and then write down the formulation for the problem and then implement it in Excel and try to solve it using Excel solver. So let's read through this question together. So Andrew has a fund, $240,000, which he actually gained from other investment, actually opportunity that he had in the past, and now he has this lump sum of money. He want to invest it in five stocks, five different industries. So five market sectors, and this is the budget that he has. So his decision, let me write down here. So decision. The decision that he needs to make is how much money to invest in each industry. And I'm gonna use A for agriculture, H for healthcare, B for banking, M for manufacturing, and R for real estate. Real estate, just to make it a little bit simpler in terms of displaying. So five different industries, and now the decision is how much to invest. So, and then objective function would be, so he is looking for maximum expected return resulting from investing this whole sum of money into these different actually industries. So objective function then would be maximum of expected return which is, so if he if he invests $1 in agriculture industry, he's expected to get 11% out of it. So $1 would be $1 investment would lead to 0.11 dollar expected return. So if he invests, instead of $1, if he invests $8, he's gonna get 8 times 11%, right? Plus, so let me just put it here. Sorry, 6.5%. So there should be another 0 here. Plus percent of age plus 9% for banking, 12% for manufacturing, 8.5% for real estate. So this is the maximum expected return. This is the formula. And then he's got a set of 4 constraints. Constraints. So the first constraint would be that he cannot invest more than $240,000, which is his budget actually. So the budget constraint is that budget is telling us that A plus H plus B plus M plus R that's the total amount of money that he has available. And then the financial consultant actually sets 4 constraints, 4 additional constraints. Total investment in agriculture and manufacturing should be less than $150,000. So the total investment in agriculture and manufacturing, so constraint 1, agriculture and manufacturing. This is the total amount invested in agriculture and manufacturing, and it should not be, let me read it again, should not be more than is basically less than or equal to. This should be less than or equal to 150. The second constraint, so that's for the first one. The second constraint says total investment in banking, B, should not be more than. Should not be more than is basically, again, less than or equal. So banking constraint, the second constraint, banking should not be greater than, which basically says that should be less than or equal to 50. Next constraint, total amount invested in manufacturing, M, should not be more than, again, should be less than or equal to 45% of the sum of investment in banking and healthcare. So B plus H. So this is how we write it. The total constraint 3, the total amount invested in manufacturing should not be more than, or basically should be less than or equal to 45% of the total money invested in banking and healthcare, if I'm not mistaken, banking and healthcare sectors, yes. And then last constraint, the amount invested in real estate should be at least 20%. Should be at least basically is greater than or equal. It should be greater than or equal to 20% of the sum of investment in banking and healthcare. Again, banking and healthcare. So real estate should be greater than, real estate, the amount invested in real estate should be greater than or equal to 20% of the total investment in banking and healthcare. And then we know that A, B, H, and M and R, they're all should be non-negative. They cannot take negative numbers. The amount of investment in an industry cannot be negative. We're not short selling, right? So it has to be a positive number or 0. So this is our formulation. This is our formulation, and I'm now gonna go to Excel and try to solve it. So it's always beneficial if you parameters. So let me just copy from here. Let's just put A. I guess that's easier. 11%. A 11%, or you can simply put 0.1, and then age 65. B 9%, and 12%, and R 8.5%. And then let me get rid of these guys. So, and then we have a total budget which is $240,000. So this is our parameters. This is the set of parameters, and then decision variables. Get rid of this. So I need to assign empty cell to my decision variable. So I need to determine the cells that I'm going to use as my changing cells or decision variables. Okay. So next thing is to write down the objective function. Write down the formula. The formula is, so if I go back here, my objective function is the sum product of amount of investment, my decision variables, and expected return of each one. So it's going to be sum product of these 5 guys, comma, investment. So that's the objective function. And now constraints. The first one is budget. So the total investment is the sum of decision variables should be equal to, I just use it to show that it should be equal to my budget. So the sum of investment should be equal to my total budget. Next thing, Next constraint, A plus M, the total money invested in agriculture and manufacturing should not be more than 150. So agriculture and manufacturing should be less than or equal to 150. Next one, banking should be less than 50,000. Banking less than 50,000. So this is constraint 1. So we have 4 constraints. Let me just. So constraint 2 is saying that banking should be less than or equal to 50,000. Right, and then the third constraint, manufacturing should be less than or equal to 45% of banking and healthcare. Manufacturing, so left hand side manufacturing should be less than or equal to 45% of sum of banking and healthcare. H&B 45% manufacturing. So what I'm doing here is that I'm just writing as I put in my formulation, but in some cases, if you actually face problems, if the Excel solver didn't solve it, if you do this way, you can transform this. You can write it in another way. So this is equivalent to M minus 45% of B plus H less than or equal to 0. So these two, so this and these are exactly the same thing, right? Sometimes I know that for some people in Mac, for example, Mac laptops, it's better to use these format and put only numbers in the right hand side. It should be the same. There shouldn't be any problem technically, but just in case. So if you face any trouble, you may actually transform it to these two formats. But in here I'm gonna use the original format. So R real estate, the last constraint, real estate equal to R greater than or equal to 20% of the sum of banking and healthcare. So we don't have any integer constraints. They can be any numbers from 0 to 240,000. So any decimal number is fine. So I don't need to add binary or integer constraint, but let me just go ahead and solve it. So if we go to data, and again, I don't have the solver here, I have to add it. Solver is checked, so let me uncheck once. Do it again. It came up. Okay. So if we go to solver, we want to maximize profit. We want to maximize expected return by changing these 5 guys, the amount of investment in different industries, subject to budget constraint. Oops. Subject to B12 should be equal to F12. These 3 guys should be less than or equal to the 3 guys. And then last constraint, this should be greater than or equal to the right hand side. Okay. Make on constraints variable non-negative AHBMR. So this is good, non-negativity constraints as we have here. Right, so and then we're gonna use simplex LP, and that's it. This should be good enough. So this is, you can actually add sensitivity or answer report, but since the question didn't ask us to, it actually asked to solve using Excel. So you're not actually to add sensitivity report, but you may, depending on the case, depending on the questions, if you want to do that, you just select from here and press OK. But technically we don't want any extra sheets. But if you need to do, this is how you add it, and then these are the shadow prices for different constraints. And then these are the reduced cost, opportunity cost for each variable, and then here's the answer report. But even for answer report, I'm just gonna delete this one, and I'm gonna go back to my original sheet here. So the answer here is as follows: 127,500 in agriculture, nothing in healthcare, 50,000 in banking, 22,500 in manufacturing, and 40,000 in real estate. And if you check, you will see that all the constraints are satisfied. This should be less than, it is the case. This should be greater. It's okay. All of them are satisfied, and the total expected return would be 24. And if you want to know the average expected return, would be this divided by your total budget, for example. So you, on average, you are making 10%, 10.2%, 10.3% return if you follow these decisions.